Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. As always, my name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Stacy Parkinson, the VP of People and Culture at Sharethrough, an ad tech platform. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, Stacy, I want to ask you about why so many companies seem to be asking employees to go to the office. We have Disney, we have Starbucks, we have a number of other companies that are telling employees that, hey, you need to go to the office. And we have the report from Monster.com, their 2023 Work Watch report, that this is a systematic issue. So what gives?
I think the shift back to in-office really seems to be based on multiple factors. I think there is a negative perception that employees are more, distracted and perhaps less productive working from home. And I think there's also a perception that there's a lack of collaboration, or that some meetings such as trainings, brainstorm sessions, creative sessions are better done in office and in person. So I think that is one of the main things. I think there's also challenges associated with a hybrid or a remote first workforce. When we talk about the sense of engagement for employees and their sense of belonging and social activities and happenings, et cetera. So I think that might be one of the main sources that is, asking employees to come back into the office.
Well, it's interesting. So I had 21 companies figure out their transition to hybrid work, including Fortune 200 companies like Applied Materials, as well as smaller companies. And there's definitely the sense of what Microsoft research called productivity paranoia, where they found that 85% of managers felt that they couldn't be confident that their workers were productive when working remotely. But when we actually dig down and look at the data on productivity, we can very clearly see that people are, on average, much more productive when working remotely. And that productivity has improved over the course of the pandemic. It was about 5% at the beginning of the pandemic, as measured not simply by surveys, but as employee monitoring software, for example, found this, so actual monitoring of employees. But also people's productivity improved throughout the pandemic during the time they spent working remotely. So for example, there was a Stanford University study which showed that people were about 5% more productive in May 2020, but that grew to 9% more productive by May 2022 when they worked remotely, because people learned how to collaborate better, how to communicate better, how to brainstorm better. Companies made more investments into various tech platforms to collaborate effectively, project management, Microsoft Teams, Trello, and so on. And governments and utilities made investments into faster broadband. So people grew to be 9% more productive. So given that there's this extensive data, and when I dig down into a new company and kind of show them, let's look at the productivity in your company, they find that, yeah, when you actually measure the productivity, people's productivity is higher when they work remotely on average. Why do you think people who are not maybe measuring productivity very well, what makes them worry about worker productivity despite all this data?
That's a great question. I mean, I followed the research. I hear you, and Sharethrough has opted for a remote first workforce. So we are behind that, and we have really witnessed that our employees are very productive, working from home and working from anywhere where they wish, whether it is in one of our offices or at home from a coffee spot or a vacation destination. I think, as I mentioned before, there's misconceptions. I think there was, pre-pandemic, the in-office culture, there was a sense of control of seeing employees physically present, seeing employees in meetings together and seeing the ins and outs. Potentially, it's really that loss of perceived control, but employees are asking for it. We see it in all researches that employees, as we know them today, 90% of employees do not want to go back into the office 5 days a week. So, the people have spoken, and they, have found, more flexibility, autonomy, a better work-life balance. I'm not talking about the first few months of COVID, but
Sure.
now that, today there's a better sense of work-life balance and flexibility. So again, I think it goes back to, I believe it's a misconception about performance.
Excellent. So good. So we're on the same page that it is a misconception. I think that's what the Microsoft team found as well. That's why they call it productivity paranoia, right? Paranoia is not about reality. So absolutely, I think I absolutely aligned with you that it's a misconception. And one of the things that you mentioned, I think autonomy is really important to discuss, because something that I see, and I think you point out very well, is this sense of control, of a desire by managers for control. But when you look at the research for what works well for knowledge workers, who are the people who are able to work remotely, we see that more autonomy works much better for them. They are more creative and more productive when they have more autonomy, rather than when they have someone just micromanaging them and looking over their shoulder. So I'm curious, what has your experience been in terms of this providing people with more autonomy rather than micromanaging them and looking over their shoulder?
Yeah, I think it's really important to measure output and not measure time spent in front of the screen, because that can vary from one person to the next. I think also in terms of autonomy is, as I mentioned before, about providing options as to where the employee can do their best work. Some people it is at home, some people it is in the office, some people it's a combination of both. So, I think Sharethrough has really opted into, we have passes for WeWork stations. Should you want that as an option, go for it. It could be for a half day, just for one meeting, 5 days a week, as you wish. Same for, our office spaces where we have permanent locations. We help set our employees up at home by providing a monthly allowance for, cell phone and internet bills, etc. And we have also launched a new work from anywhere program where employees can, work out of Mexico for a couple of weeks if that is their wish, if they want to get away from our harsh North American winters or Canadian winters. So again, it's much about, here are your goals, here are the objectives that we'll set together, and how you make those happen is your own preference and how you go about doing that and where you go about doing that.
Excellent. Yes, that's what I've done. Definitely recommended to my clients. And they found that is, when you let go, you actually gain more. But you gain more from your workers when you let them go and when you show them trust. Now, yes. I do want to pivot back to the issue of connection, because I definitely think this is the one big issue that when finally we figure out, when I work with clients and we figure out, okay, let's figure out what the hybrid work, remote work arrangements is. It is true that people feel a weaker sense of connection when they spend part of their time working remotely or all of their time working remotely. What do you find at Sharethrough are good techniques to address that weakening of connection?
I think it's really being intentional about how you gather people together. So, stating, come back to the office 4 days a week. And then employees come back, different days, and then it's kind of ghost town. There's not everybody's in, and then they spend the whole day on Zoom. That is not going to help the sense of belonging and connection. Yeah. However, if you have planning sessions, brainstorm sessions, you have lunches or social gatherings, that make it really worth it, so that employees, when they do leave their homes and come into the office, there's a purpose and there's a sense to it. One of the things that, we could do is for onboarding of a new employee, it's a delicate period in the employee's journey at a new company to start, alone in their basement or alone in their office. But we, now that the world has opened up again, if it's a short drive away or if it's, a plane ride away, then we will ensure that there's a physical onboarding that is done with the team, with other colleagues and so on. We do some workshops where we do fly people in to do certain workshops, and it's really, so it's not as often and it's not every week or every day. So it's on an ad hoc basis, but those moments are, pleasurable. We also add in some social activities, et cetera. And I think that really helps a sense of belonging and that sense of community and involvement. I'll give you other examples as well. In September, we had a 3-day all-employee offsite in Montreal. So again, this is not something that we're going to do every quarter. We haven't established the exact frequency, but those 3 days together are just gold. They're workshops, they're lunches, they're team building, they are, cross collaboration, they're creative sessions. So they are really thoughtfully planned. And now next week, we are all going to Mexico for another offsite. So so those are things that Sharethrough is working through, just really being thoughtful and intentional.
Yeah, that thoughtfulness and intentionality, I think, is critical, because what the typical company, they're trying to transpose their office-centric culture on hybrid work, on remote work. And then they figure out, oh, this doesn't work very well, let's get everyone back to the office, instead of trying to figure out how can we actually collaborate and lead effectively in this new modality. I wanted to add something to what you're talking about. I think those techniques are wonderful, and I think that's great. Curious, maybe you already do this, just didn't mention it. Something I always do with my clients is a mentoring program. So a mentoring program for new staff, especially for recent hires. So the onboarding rolls smoothly into a mentoring where we have them have a mentor, and it's especially important for hybrid work, remote work. They have a mentor from their team to teach them how to work in their team, do on-the-job training, and so on, pull them into the team. But one of the challenges with hybrid work and remote work is that you lose those weak ties across the organization. So make sure that there is also a second mentor from a different business unit of the organization who can provide those connections, who can provide those ties, and whose goal is specifically to introduce this person to valuable others in the organization who they might want to know, and help them understand more of the culture of other departments, other parts of the organization, how they might proceed within it. And I'm curious if there's anything that's similar to what you do, or if you think that might be a useful idea in some way to implement at Sharethrough.
It's a great idea. I love it. We don't call it mentorship, but we call it a buddy program. And it is much of everything that you say, just somebody who is not the person's direct, manager, somebody you can ask, silly questions to. And that is really your culture ally for getting to know the business, the people. And it has been super successful for us at Sharethrough.
Excellent. Now, when I come to an organization, we start our engagement, one of the first things I talk about from the leadership perspective, leadership tends to be anxious about this sort of issue, changing things. The first thing I talk about is customer centricity. How do we create a system at the organization, a hybrid work policy, remote work policy, that is customer centric and that puts customers' needs first and then works back from that? So can you tell me a little bit, I imagine that's something that you did at Sharethrough as well. Can you tell me about how you connect customer needs to the kind of work arrangements that your employees have?
Right. I think it's all about, open communication and just having different various channels to communicate, with the various tools that we have. So, one of the main things that we did in 2022 is that we've, enlarged our geographic expansion, and we are now present in Europe. And one of the main things was just really so that we're on 2 different time zones. And I think that's really important, because if we're servicing a client who's in Europe, different time zones, we need somebody who's responsive on the same time zone. So we now have a team in Europe. So from a time zone perspective, that really works. Productivity tools, and if not, I mean, we are a client-centric or a customer-centric type of business. I mean, that's how we that's something that we really pride ourselves on. So we are very, very available, and as I mentioned, all of our employees have an allowance every month, so that they can stay connected with their phones and laptops, etc.
Excellent. And as we're finishing up, can you share with me specifically what Sharethrough does, what kind of customers you have, how you serve them, and how that connects to hybrid and remote work?
Yeah, so Sharethrough is an advertising tech company, and our clients are everywhere in North America and Europe, as I mentioned before, and could be any kind of client. We service big brands, and also we work in partnership with ad agencies.
Excellent. Good. As we're ending up, are there any last words that you wish to share? Anything that we haven't covered yet?
I think the only thing we haven't really spoken about is from health and wellness perspective, we have spoken a lot about productivity and how it's measured, et cetera, and then we talked about servicing clients. And I think one thing that companies really have to be cognizant of is the health and wellness of their employees, and whether that is in office or at home. Zoom fatigue is a real thing.
Sure.
And I think there's really good hygiene to be put around Zoom meetings and how we help employees kind of find that balance, because at home there are less barriers, I guess, between work and life. So I think that is definitely a focus for Sharethrough, as it should be for numerous employers. As we find this better sense of balance, et cetera. So I think there's efforts to be done there in having good meeting hygiene, because as I mentioned, Zoom fatigue is a thing. Sure. Death by 1,000 meetings, et cetera. So I think that is kind of like a call out that employers should be looking out for.
Definitely. Yes. So when I work with clients, we work on setting boundaries and getting to a stage where we maximize asynchronous communication rather than synchronous, to make synchronous communication a higher level, higher demand sort of thing, rather than automatically jumping in a Zoom call. If it can be a voicemail, let it be a voicemail.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. I hope you've benefited and learned from Stacy Parkinson's wisdom. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, make sure to review the show wherever you check this out, Apple, iTunes, Amazon, and so on. And please make sure to subscribe. All right. I look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.